Thanks everyone for coming. The panel is IT panel, and as all of us know that Indian IT industry has grown phenomenally in the last 10 to 15 years and is $100 billion worth as of this year. Analysts from worldwide, including Gartner, are predicting that Indian IT industry would be 225 billion by 2020. Is that possible? What the leading thinkers of the IT industry see this opportunity as, and what changes would be required to make this happen? This is the key theme of the IT panel today, which will be moderated by O'Neill. O'Neill is the director of India investment at a billion-dollar private equity firm, which focuses on technology. The format of the discussion would be, I'm going to pass the stage to O'Neill. Each and every panelist is going to introduce himself, and then there would be 40 minutes or so of discussion. And the last 20 minutes are for question-answer sessions from any one of you guys. We have the mics here. You can line up there after the discussion and ask your questions. Thanks a lot. Please give a big round of applause to the panelists.
Hello, good morning, everybody. IT and IT-enabled services can mean different things to various people. So we just want to define that just so we're all on the same page. As the group here, we define it as all-encompassing IT consulting, outsourced product development, BPO, analytics, and hardware. So we really are defining this more as technology services when Vishal talked about the market growth. To put some numbers on it, as Vishal said, a little bit of reiteration, I mean, this has been a tremendous growth story. We were looking at a $100 million market in 1990, which went to an $8 billion market in 2001, largely fueled by Y2K, and now we're at $100 billion. NASSCOM's projecting us to go to $225 billion in 10 years. So I think as a group, I mean, we've done a little bit of work, and at least one of the few things we agree upon is how we got here so far are not going to be the same drivers in how we get there tomorrow to the $225 billion number. So the factors we believe how we got here are basically growth of the Americas and Europe drove demand. We credit a lot the education, the English learning system of India for getting us here so far. Also, economies of scale and cost arbitrage and tax breaks. But what we want to center around this discussion is, what are the factors that will get us from 100 to 225? By way of background, Vishal gave a little bit of synopsis on myself, just to expand upon it. I'm the director of India investments at Riverwood Capital. We're a $1 billion private equity fund. The founding team built a company called Flextronics from 1994 to 2006. We're focused, our global fund focused across technology-enabled companies. We've done a lot in Latin America, a lot in the US. With that, I'm going to hand it over to each of the panelists to give a brief biography on themselves. We'll start with Supratim.
Yeah, hi. I have little more than 20 years of experience in the Indian IT industry. I work for Tata Consultancy Services. I've been primarily on the IT side of our business. However, last year I moved into this very exciting BPO side of our business. Things are growing very fast over there. I'm Sloani, and I'm glad to be back on campus.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anuj Kapoor. I am the country manager in India for Telcordia Technologies. This is a Piscataway-based old Bell Labs AT&T company. We've recently been acquired by Ericsson. That brings me into Ericsson. Unlike most people on this dais, I have all my 25 plus years of experience in India, studied in India, worked in India, had extensive experience on the IT side with companies like HCL, PCL, Fujitsu, Ikem, and then in telecom with the likes of Motorola, Alcatel, Lucent, Samsung, and now Ericsson. So glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Hi, good morning. Ajay Chaturvedi. Pleasure and honor to be here. I've been having some very vibrant discussions with a lot of people around, and I'm hoping to continue that. I'm an engineer from BITS Pilani and went to Penn Engineering in the Wharton School in 2002. been a consultant and a banker for about a little over 14 years, and then I decided to take the entrepreneurial plunge in 2010. So I founded a company called Harva, which I believe is really about penetrating rural India. So we've set up the first all-women rural BPOs. We're into renewable energy and looking to dabble into microfinance in a very, very different format. And look forward to having active discussion here today.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Srini Kaushik, and I think the biggest difference between the rest of the panelists and me is I've been in this country for 25 years. My entire 25-year experience in IT has been in the US, primarily 3 companies. I was a distinguished engineer and member of the IBM Academy of Technology. I spent about 10 years at IBM building out their e-business business. The next 10 years of my career were spent as CIO for Nationwide, which is the 4th largest insurer in the US and a Fortune 100 company. And the last couple of years, I was at HP building out their enterprise services, in the areas of analytics and cloud and other areas. What I'm doing right now is, again, I think it's a very relevant topic because I do believe the services industry is ripe for a pretty significant change to get to the 225. So a couple of months ago, I launched a new startup called Right Brain Systems, and we'll touch on a couple of those things there. But my role, I think, what I'm going to try to do today is to bring the consumer of these services perspective into it, because a lot of these guys here have had a lot more experience in India than I have. But as a consumer of these services and as somebody who's run a services organization globally, I try to bring that perspective to this. Thanks.
So let's start, we're going to take a top-down approach. So what I want to start and talk about is the infrastructure, both physical as well as intangible infrastructure, and if that is in place to really generate this growth to 200 to 25 billion. So I'm going to hand this over actually to Anuj. Talk a little bit about both physical infrastructure as opposed to just connectivity, fiber, and also the intangibles, the education system, the regulatory regime, and how you see that as driving this going forward.
Okay, so I think when we talk of infrastructure, really the the supply side of this. I mean, we've reached the 100 billion mark. It's going to double that over the next 8 odd years. I think bulk of the infrastructure that's been supporting this has been in the big metros, and I think that's what this has been about. We've all been hearing about going to tier 2 cities, but I think it's more about going all the way down to the top 100 cities of India, and having the ability to be able to work from there and create that pool. So we heard a lot about education in the previous panel. We're seeing a lot of that happening, as we move down. I can particularly talk about telecom. I think the last decade and a half, we've penetrated voice tremendously in the country. We're going to have 1 billion, connections by the end of before the end of this year. But I think the next wave is about them being internet enabled. And I think India has got the unique situation where the internet experience is going to happen for the first time for a consumer on a mobile wireless device. And I think that's going to lead to a lot of domestic demand for IT. I think, when we looked at in 2000 and we looked at the McKinsey NASSCOM report of wanting to go to 80 billion, it was largely about, external to the country. Today, 30% of the 100 billion, is going to come from domestic. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And the infrastructure that's getting created, particularly from the telecom perspective, is going to facilitate that. I was glad to see RIL being one of the sponsors. They're going to be one of the major rollouts that we're going to see over the next year or so. A lot of us are associated with that very, very closely. And that's going to trigger a data growth, or the ability to use data, and we hear some of the guys that have had challenges with that in the last few years, to be able to do that. Besides that, I mean, the ability to reach places, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, roads, airports, I think a lot of that is happening too. Today, the most latest example was the Delhi-Agra Expressway. You now reach there in less than 2 hours. And you're going to see a lot more of that as you move along. So just to sum up on the infrastructure piece, it's going to actually be about increasing the supply side, particularly from India. That doesn't mean that the Indian IT companies cannot supply from outside of India, but I think predominantly the supply has been from India. It'll continue to be so.
Well, O'Neill, I can jump into that. So a couple of different things. We talked about the fact that what got us here needs to kind of get modified for us to get to 225, right? Some of us had the pleasure of listening to Kaushik Basu yesterday at the dinner, and today, Mr. Godrej also stressed the fact of education. Education and the highly educated and English-speaking workforce is what got us here. The challenge that you have, it's actually a good one to have, because as the domestic consumption picks up in India, it's starting to put a real constraint on the skills. So as a consumer on this end for services, or the first, so I'd say I was CIO from 2000 to about 2011, and in that time frame, the first 4 or 5 years, the quality of talent that you got from India was just unmatched. Right? And as the local demand has picked up and the size of the global market has grown, we've started to see a decline in that, because you start going from tier 1, tier 2 to tier 3 and tier 4 schools. So the education system in India does have to ramp up to kind of catch up to the increased demand coming in. So that's clearly something that's there, and it's great to see all the industry leaders and others talking about it. I think a second part of this thing is, as you look at growth moving forward, what are you getting educated in is important, right? And so a lot of what technology is considered to be a left-brained activity, right? It's analytics, it's the ability to think logically and others. But if you think about the companies that are successful today, right, the Apples and others, they don't have the best technology. We can get into an argument about if they have it or not. They don't, because there are better hardware devices and others that are out there. But they will win every single time, because they have figured out how to deliver that experience, how to make technology kind of invisible to the consumer. And that's kind of what's driving their growth, and that's kind of what's driving that fanatic following they've got. In order to do that, though, our education system, I think we've got to go take being someone who's completely educated in India and having gone through it and worked through it, like you're kind of programmed to think a certain way in terms of driving efficiency and using math to make decisions and others. We have to figure out how we can actually drive that second part of it in terms of for the solutions of the future. If we have to be the dominating thing, that's going to be one of our differentiators.
So you've actually been, building out a company that's actually been targeting these tier 2 rural cities. Right. Just curious to get your take.
So it's interesting because while I agree with the infrastructure needs to be built up, and that's something that the government is definitely doing a lot of. From my perspective, especially having lived in the US and having worked in a very different industry, the biggest challenge that I sort of see is the infrastructure is getting built, but you've got the scams. And until the bandwidth is released, people don't really, so you have this intermittent bandwidth issues. But more importantly, we're able to set up the wireless networks, and we're able to get the wireless networks and internet connectivity. Now that's where the challenge of education comes in. So while the government might be talking a lot about how to implement these things and how to get the people to sort of use the internet, today the internet penetration is a little over 15%. Even that's not by individual user basis. So the challenge that I see is really how do you connect both these things. We're able to, with my company, we're able to go out and set up these digital huts in rural India, and we're able to employ people on a very, very specific training basis. But you cannot just sell a cell phone or an iPad and expect them to start using it. especially if they've been at all conditioned in any kind of a technology. So really, it's a two-pronged approach. While we have the government intervention, while we have the infrastructure that's being laid out, the privatized companies are coming in, I think it's going to be a lot of entrepreneurial drive and a lot of product innovation at the grassroots for us to be able to take it to that level in India where we can then start to maybe, I'm actually looking at a figure even far bigger if we're able to tap that grassroots level of rural India.
So let's segue. You talked a little bit about product innovation. So I want to transition to that. It's kind of a common phrase that when, if ever, will India kind of build that notorious product company? Some say, hey, will a Facebook or Google ever come out of India? It's a sort of a sensitive topic in the space. So let's talk about product innovation, and I want to be thoughtful around this, both innovation as it with respect to products, but also services innovation. Supratim as kind of head of one of the largest services organizations, I figure you have some interesting comments on this one.
Well, the very first comment is that we leave the United States and Europe to focus on the Googles and the Twitters, whereas we focus on what is actually needed out there. If I may quote Sam Petroda, he said that in a country like India, innovation ought to be within the financial reach of the people. So we have different priorities. We want to do more with less and for more. I think that's the philosophy that drives us. So before I get into the IT part of the service sector and the innovation that we've been doing, may I also remind you that we brought to the market, Tata Motors, the Tata Nano. It was brought within the reach of people who could not afford a four-wheeler before. So it's not that in India we think about inventing the automobile. It's not that in India we think about inventing a water filter. TCS has invented a $20 water filter, which brings the purest of water, irrespective of the source, to millions of people today. So again, the philosophy is to do more with less for more. That's what is driving innovation in India. Coming to the IT services sector, I think TCS set the benchmark and revolutionized the Indian IT sector when it launched GNDM, which is the Global Network Delivery Model. It was a unique model wherein we created the offshore delivery model based out of India and connecting tools, resources, people, infrastructure globally and delivering high quality and huge volumes of information and work to Europe and the United States. Now, what that did was created an example for the rest of the Indian IT companies to follow and multiply that. And today we have close to 3 million people employed in India in the IT services sector, and which can be directly contributed and attributed to the global network delivery model that TCS invented. And that's an innovation in the service sector. So we don't need to have an Apple or a Google or a Twitter or a product like that. We can innovate in the service sector and bring benefits to the people and help millions of people. You see, one job created in the IT sector leads to creation of 4 additional jobs in related industry. So that's 4 into 3, 12 million people who benefited. Given an average Indian family size of 5, that's 60 million people who have been benefited through this. Moving to the next step, what TCS did was created what's OGSS. That's another innovation in the service sector, one global standard of service. It's like walking into a McDonald's in Boston and asking for a filet of fish, and you get the same thing in New Delhi McDonald's or Shanghai in Russia. So irrespective of where TCS is delivering from, whether it's Kolkata, Chennai, Mumbai, Hungary, or South America, you can expect the same global standards of service, and that's what we call experiencing certainty. Now, these are innovations one cannot just look down upon and say, hey, listen, this is service sector. And the reason I'm saying is because we had some engaging discussions last night and et cetera, where primarily I think the focus has been for many to think of innovation only related to products, whereas I think we have created a revolution in India which has been driven, the IT sector revolution, by innovation in the service sector.
I mean, I'm happy. We had a really engaging discussion yesterday, just how to kind of take this forward. I think just from a perspective of the conference and discussion, it's great that we've got the whole innovation theme going, and services have been very innovative. I think India is really called the land of jugaad, where we're able to sort of create these low-cost innovations. So Tata Nano is something that sort of really competes with jugaad. But it's great, but should not get us to a point of complacency. It's really at the point that where we are, it's really the entrepreneurial plunge that will have to come in from places like MIT. I mean, this is the heart, the bed of innovation, where if people sort of start to take plunge in terms of what are the things that will really benefit in that particular locality. I mean, that's what will really matter. Today, I was, in fact, interestingly enough, we're looking at India. We've got this whole political turmoil and Colgate. And we're not really talking about any product companies that are sort of taking a leap. Whereas you have the US presidential elections, and we're talking about Apple's iPhone 5 turnover, which will impact the GDP. So that's a very interesting take from, we're comparing apples to oranges. I think it'll be interesting to sort of see what kind of innovations come out of here and come out of the Indian market, and especially in terms of products, that would really plunge us or take us to the next level of growth.
That's really not an area for me to comment upon, but may I also remind you that in the year 2012, India has clocked $12 billion in product revenue in the IT sector. Now, that's an increase from 0.5% in 2008 out of $298 billion to 2.2% of $537 billion. Now, you may look at it as the product part of the IT industry experiencing about a 10-year lag if you superimpose the graph with the service sector. So I'm hopeful that this product side of it will also grow in about 10 years to where the service sector is today. And there are some interesting data points, if you may like to note, that in 2008 was actually a landmark year, that 52%, for the first time, the majority of firms registered with NASSCOM were focused on product development. Earlier, it used to be service-led. And out of the top 20 BFSI products, banking, financial services, insurance products globally, 7 are from India, led by banks of TCS and iFlex. So the story with the products is also, I think, very good, and it's happening.
Yeah, and I think what you're going to hear, the spirited debate you're hearing about is really not a can India innovate or not, right? If you go back to the fundamental, two different types of innovation in terms of continuous innovation and disruptive innovation, right? We see examples of continuous innovation every single day, right? It's the reason why you've taken an industry, that started in 1990 and grown it this much. You can't stay in business without continuous innovation. The examples that Supratim pointed out that TCS pulled off in the in the late 1990s around, it was disruptive innovation, because people who thought IT could only be delivered in a certain model, you came in and completely disrupted it with a different model, which created a new industry. I think the points that we were talking about is, okay, great. If you kind of look at companies like Microsoft and others, once they became a certain size, innovation, is not what came in. That hunger was lost. And what we're talking about is that complacency, right? You don't want that complacency setting in. So instead of talking about it as are we capable of product innovation, like what is the environment, and do we have the competencies and capabilities set up in such a way that you are encouraging future disruptive innovations, right? It is a $100 billion industry, right? Most of the times, the next big idea cannibalizes your existing model. Are we ready to go there? Just when you start thinking about it, one of my previous employers can't get out of the rut because they're the leader in making personal computers, right? And so when you start bringing in ideas like, look, the personal computing model has changed, right? You're getting to smartphones and smart devices. How do I take a $40 billion cash cow and change it, right? And so it does inhibit innovation. So how do we actually start getting to that dialogue in India where, yes, we're built on a labor arbitrage, having a lot of labor available and skilled labor available. When you're getting into today's environment, the future environment that's enabled by the cloud, and where you have access becomes easier, the economics change, and when you get there, are we ready for it in the services industry? Was the question we were getting to.
Yeah, if I would just take a parallel of the telecom industry in India, I mean, it's we are 1.2 billion people, one of the most competitive markets in the world. I mean, in the lowest revenues per user, and still these companies are profitable, at least the top three that they are, and we're of course, there's lots more to be done. Having said that, I think there has been a lot of innovation in telecom services that we have seen. We've seen minute factories being created by the likes of Bharati. We are seeing some of those innovations being taken into other parts of the world, reverse innovation as we refer to it in various industries, where you're taking the model that you've made to work in India, and making it work outside. We've seen GE do that for medical equipment, where they've got portable equipment at 10,000 rupees going out now and becoming bedside, equipment available. So I think India has been a bed of innovation in various industries. I think IT has been no different. As a mindset, I think most Indians come with innovation. Sometimes it might not be as structured, that actually leads in to what an Apple or a Google does. But I think innovation is been a strength and will continue to be a strength, and will be one of the key components to take us to 225 from the 100.
Yeah, and since you also mentioned Google and Facebook, by the way, I do believe Google and Facebook have a tremendous amount of value to this economy and to the world economy. So, absolutely. Yeah, there's no putting down what they've done to this industry. They've fundamentally changed it, and they've caused people to think about things completely differently. So yeah, I don't call it Google or Facebook, but it would be cool to have for India to have a couple of those ideas.
I agree.
I actually agree with Arun. As an investor, hands down, I think you and I might differ a little bit. Yeah. I think India is very innovative, 100%. A lot of the deals we're seeing, both early stage deals and late stage deals, there's always an innovation component to it. You can take something like domain name registration or managed services to be able to deliver that product to a 5-person SME in Hyderabad and make it work from a profitability standpoint is very innovative to us to bring that business model. We are seeing companies with reduced fixed cost structure that are maybe 10% of the analogous companies in the US delivering those services in India. Some people don't know this, but I know, FDI has come into retail, but already the largest Target is actually somewhere near Bangalore. What that is the whole entity of Target does their predictive analytics. They do that out of Bangalore. 100% of their analytics. Same with Tesco. Walmart Labs has been in the press recently. They acquired a company called Cosmix to build out their predictive analytics effort. Right away, post that acquisition, 100% or a good amount of those employees are actually being sourced out of Bangalore now. Flipkart is a very well-known example. To do that supply chain logistics as well as the cash on delivery, as investors, we think a lot of these business models are very innovative. Valuations is a different story, but innovation, we feel at least, is alive and well.
So, no, I mean, this is perfect. In fact, I don't think we're questioning whether there's capability to innovate or not. The intent to innovate is there as well. But I think you also made a very interesting point that it's really mostly about cost innovation. If it's not cost effective, it'll not work in India. And that's because it's a mass market, right? So the biggest thing, the biggest challenge from my perspective running a rural company, I see that unless it's talking about really, really cost-effective, which is 1/10 the price factor that you're, probably giving in the U.S. So, for example, one of our centers that we started out in, we had to, pay the cost of internet at about $30 a month per user because we did not have, fiber to that place because that was remote areas. Now, we've managed to convince these people and the telecom providers to be able to give us a scale and reduce that cost. But until, from that perspective, to tap that market, until it's cost effective, and if the innovation is really from that perspective, it would not work. But I think my focus is more on product innovation, more on, things like Apple. Google and Facebook is great. I mean, truly value those. Apple is great. Can Apple, sort of innovate out of India to be more cost-effective, to be more applicable for the population over there?
So that said,
may I just add a little point over there? While this discussion was also going on yesterday, a lot of questions were addressed to me regarding why we are not getting so big into products the Indian IT services companies. We are doing good at what we are doing. It's not that we are saying we are shying away from it. We are also into products, as I mentioned. But I think the India story is very good, and that's what we need to look at overall. And the Indian IT services sector is doing very well. Now, if you're looking at R&D, product development, and other things, I think the IBMs, the Googles, the Twitters, and Facebooks, everyone's there in India using Indian talent. I mean, Intel's drumming chip was developed in India. And cutting-edge research work is going on using Indian talent. So it may be that it is not the Indian IT services firm which is going to come out with the next Apple or a Google or a Twitter. It's going to be Twitter coming up with a better thing, but based out of India, or Apple doing the same thing. Or it could be the 350 firms which have been registered as software startups, out of which 100 were alone in 2008. They would be coming up with the next innovation in terms of products or devices. So we are each in our own sphere of activity. We are kind of excelling in those, and I think we will continue to do that.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about cloud and cloud adoption as it pertains to India. A little bit from a unique perspective. One can make the argument that the IT services industry generated a lot of growth from providing services around clunky on-premise software. As we really migrate to the cloud, theoretically, a lot of these software packages are going to require a lot less services around it. Is that going to inhibit growth? And if so, why? And if so, why not? How do we address that issue? Srini, given your work at RightBrain, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one.
Well, I'm gonna put a concept out there, in terms of the cloud that it is. By the way, I'm not putting it out to say India cannot succeed in this space. I'm actually putting it out as a challenge, tying it back to the innovation and others, right? Everybody wants to talk about cloud as infrastructure as a service. They'll categorize it and they'll give you all of the different components of it. At the core, what cloud allows you to do is it lowers barriers to entry, right? And here's fundamentally what that means, right? Our model has been successful because we've had the scale. We've had the number of people, we have educated people, we have the base to be able to do it. And we've succeeded. We've taken advantage of it, and we succeeded in the first 20 years. What cloud actually does by lowering barriers to entry is companies need far less resources to reach minimum efficient scale, right? For individuals who are economics people, you know what minimum efficient scale is. So what that does now is, okay, the size that actually helped us in the past, if you're not careful, it can work against you because you have smaller and faster moving things. I'll give you a couple of different examples. I don't know how many of you have heard of Cloud Spokes, right? And Cloud Spokes is a network of hundreds and thousands of developers. Many of them work for companies of people that are in this room, right? That on their own time are contributing to challenges. So, I had to put together a mobile demo for one of my clients as I was getting through. Go on to Cloud Spokes, and I put on a challenge out there saying, this is the mobile application I need, and I'm willing to put a challenge for $1,000 on it. I literally got about 15 actual mobile demos coming out, and I ended up picking one that's from Eastern Europe, right? Because it had a lot of the capabilities coming in. And mind you, that wasn't built by a company with a large name or any of those things. It was built by an individual who in their spare time was able to bring that to this. That's clearly where the power of the cloud is. So for me, everybody talks about infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is a race to the bottom, because Amazon and others have commoditized it at this point in time, right? Where you can buy server or storage off the cloud for very, very cheap things. So is there more room for improvement? Absolutely, and I'm pretty sure we'll figure out ways to drive that concept into that as well. And so the continuous innovation, I'm not worried about it at all. Are we ready, to take on the challenge that cloud brings up? Is the core that we're working through, and I do believe we can. It has to come from a different line of thinking coming in. So, which is kind of, by the way, not going to spend any time on it. That's what my company's founded on, right? To be able to drive that and to say, okay, when you look at large services when you look at the U.S. market, most of the Indian services firms have grown by focusing on the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 guys. There's a whole spectrum of mid-market companies that go from 200 million in revenue to 2 billion. That's actually too small for a lot of these guys, because I can't put 100 people in Bangalore to be able to support something like that. My whole IT department is 80 people or 100 people. So again, if you think about cloud, what it does is, in a completely information-enabled economy, right? Companies cannot scale without being good at technology. And if I'm a mid-market company, I'm being underserved today. So how do you leverage cloud to be able to drive that? Is a opportunity, which is kind of where I felt there was a big enough opportunity to kind of leave what I was doing to start this.
Have you, at TCS, have you guys given any thought to cloud services going forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things is that we have clients with legacy systems, and the primary, if you see the vertical where most of TCS or the other Indian IT firms work, are in the BFSI sector. So in the BFSI, people are very, very careful about the sanctity and security of their data. They are not too open about putting it up in the cloud. So as things stand for large corporations, and we are focused on enterprise business, they are not looking at cloud as an option. That's number one. Number two, you see, cloud will continue to require support of people. I mean, it's not going to be supported by angels, right? So even when you move towards cloud applications or so, the requirement for qualified and trained people will remain. And TCS, by the way, has already launched ION as a cloud service for the SME sector. And in our very first month of launch, we had about 250 clients signing up for it. And it's not software as a service, it's not infrastructure as a service, it's not platform as a service. We provide everything from the computer hardware to bandwidth to the application, whether it's CRM, whether it's HR, whether it's anything. We just provide the entire thing for a fixed monthly charge, and it's not even based on transactions. So ION is already a fantastic experiment that TCS is conducting in India, targeted at the SME sector. So we are there. We, in fact, keep a very close eye on where the industry is moving to, and we are leading in the existing verticals and areas, and we are also present in cloud.
No, and I'll just say, not to be controversial, but I'm just saying, okay, what enterprise-grade customers, absolutely, what Supratim said is right. If I'm one of the largest banks in the scene, I don't want to put my data on the cloud and others, right? So, but turn it on its head. That's a constraint that they've put on themselves. Somebody who's much smaller is going to figure this thing out, right? And is going to figure this thing out, because the answer is not no all the time, right? I can't do this, and ignore it. The answer is going to come, and it's going to come from the mid-sized companies. It's going to come from those smaller things. Even within the U.S., most of the economic growth is still driven by mid and small-sized companies. It's not coming from the Fortune 50 or Fortune 100. Right, it is coming from the smaller sized companies, and that's kind of where I'm kind of asking people to take it. And IAM's a good example of how TCS is focused on their core clients, but they've actually gone in and they're experimenting, right, and which is good.
So so I think everybody's saying SME is what cloud adoption is about, and I think right in our backyard, if we look at India, only 20% of our small and medium enterprises today use IT infrastructure. And I think there is a huge potential right there, with the increased, telecom penetration for internet, combined with kind of cloud services for you to be able to test those waters right at your backyard before you go out there and address the huge SME market globally as well. So I think there's a huge opportunity right there in India, waiting to explore.
I personally think it's coming. As a private equity investor, we've seen a number of interesting cloud services company. A company called NetMagic was doing a lot of innovative stuff in the financial sector, got acquired by NTT, but I think we've just seen a lot of these companies with very low occupancy rates to the tune of 20 to 25%. So think as adoption gets, hopefully we'll see some uptake in that. But I want to take the discussion and talk a little bit about growth, both organically and inorganically. So inorganically, I mean M&A opportunities, and organically, I mean the penetration of new markets, potentially underserved markets, Africa, Indonesia, and things like that. You know, at Ericsson, curious to know your guys' thoughts and strategy on that going forward.
Yeah. So I think consolidation is a way of life. It is we are seeing it in the telecom sector. We're going to see it in India, amongst operators. I think even with the with the IT players originating out of India, if you need to be able to go from 100 to 225, some of it will be inorganic, some of it will be organic, and some of the consolidation is also going to be about new markets. Today, we all know the bulk of the growth, as O'Neill mentioned, has been driven out of the United States and Europe, and the dependency is extremely high. And if people are trying to get into China and Japan and Latin America, and the challenges are language and challenges are culture, and so having local companies out there that become a part of larger corporations like TCS are going to play a very important role in our ability to be able to access that market, which today people dabble in, but they don't, get significant revenue contributions out of.
Do you see acquisitions of U.S. companies? Infosys did a fairly large one after looking for 3 years. Do you see that as a recurring trend? How does that from the TCS perspective?
Well, in 2008, TCS acquired eServe from Citibank. You're talking of Lodestone, right, from Infosys? There was a $350 million deal. HCL has done the same thing with Axon. Balance sheets are very strong for the Indian IT companies. Cash reserves are huge, and I think one can expect more and more acquisitions. What are the areas? I personally feel big data is an area where it typically involves lots of mergers and acquisitions, technology advancements, and I think in terms of new areas, along with mergers and acquisitions, it's not only going to be markets. I think there's going to be a lot of focus on scam. I don't mean Colgate and all that. Scam is your social cloud analytics and mobility. So the scam part of it is big for Indian IT companies right now. So social cloud analytics and mobility, nothing to do with coal, 2G, or CWG. So those are areas I think which is going to see a lot of development, new market, new revenue streams. Let's be very honest, most of the Indian IT service sector companies have a big focus on BFSI. Majority of the revenue comes from there. A big focus is application development and maintenance. That's the bread and butter. And one can expect with changing times that these would shift towards these new technologies and offerings.
So we're seeing a big bifurcation between the tier 1 IT services companies and the tier 2 IT services companies, both in terms of revenue growth, valuation, and metrics, and product offering. Curious to get your thoughts on, we talked about M&A of companies in developed markets, maybe companies doing social and big data analytics. Curious to get your take on what about India to India M&A, and what happens to these tier 2 companies that presumably haven't innovated, as well as TCS has?
Well, you've already seen Mahindra and Satyam. That's been a big one. And it continues to happen at the smaller levels. This is happening. Many of these things don't come in public. But Mahindra Satyam is an example for you of a big M&A in India.
Do you have any thoughts? No. Unless any of the group has any thoughts, we're going to open it up to free-flowing Q&A.
Yeah, I want to first thank you, the panel, for the insightful discussions. And as we hear from all of you that there are a lot of innovation happening, in India, which is good. All of us appreciate that we should be on that path. Wanted to hear, the panel's viewpoint, because being in MIT, we see a lot of entrepreneurial culture or innovative culture out here. So I want to hear, what Infosys, TCS, big IT services companies or the leaders like, Tatas or Birlas are doing to partner with IITs and IIMs to promote that culture in India so that, we can also ride the curve that, US students or US education industry is rising.
Large IT companies, that's you.
I mean, I can just... Well, TCS has always been very focused on having relationships with good academic institutes. Like our founder, F.C. Kohli, is from MIT, after which we have Mr. Ramadurai, who is in the board of governors of the executive program over here. We maintain very good relationships with the IITs, triple ITs, IIMs. There's a lot of engagement, but if I may comment that actually the industry, academia, the institute kind of engagement still remains at recruitment and placement level. I think you have really brought a very important point. And it's time, I think, academia put its focus on R&D. And I think it's time industry looked at these premier institutes to help us to reach the next level. It's not happening.
I think the concepts that have worked here, whether it's MIT, Stanford, Michigan's got the collaborative between the university and locally, where they've set up an incubator locally, right, to encourage entrepreneurs. That model would clearly work in India as well.
So I'll quickly take this one because while you asked for Infosys and TCS, my company is about 2 years old. We, on the acquisition front, we ended up acquiring a company because they were not able to survive. So at this point, India is really at probably the plateauing out phase of the S-curve. We've started entrepreneurial drives, or the colleges come out with sort of encouraging students to launch companies or do something in areas which have not been experimented on. But somewhere down the line, the students fresh out of college really miss out on what are the important aspects, right? You invariably focus on the wrong things. I mean, they'd focus excessively on how much money to spend on marketing, branding, and things like that, and really missing out on the fundamentals. So one of the biggest opportunities that I realized was really to tie up with the colleges and universities in India. And one of our distribution strategy is to actually go to the remote areas. So if any of you, or all of you probably would know, Pilani is sort of a small town, and most of our centers actually we're establishing now are close to university towns. What it does give us is access to talent, and those are the students that we pick up. So as far as London Business School, which also did a case study on us, we've linked up with them, give opportunity to students to come out and experiment, learn what are the possible things that they could start out, giving them all different possible options, avenues to learn, experiment, and possibly contribute back to the growth of our company as well. But I think from really a startup, my perspective, or India perspective, it's important to tap into the talent and give them a directional input. And again, not just to a lip service of it's not just recruiting and hiring during the the recruitment season. And that's what I'm experimenting here at MIT as well. So we're all up for partnering with you guys. If you'd like to come, just feel free to contact and reach out to me.
Good morning, everyone. As it was rightly pointed out, that India is going to be a unique experience in terms of a whole mass of people having a internet exposure for the first time through their handheld sets. And language and inability to access internet is a serious thing. And technologically, how far are we where it could be voice activated and voice delivered information? And is this also competent to handle the multilingual situation which India is? How far are we from that?
So do you want to take it?
Yeah. So, if I were to take that, I think a lot of internet is going to be driven, particularly on the wireless device, particularly in India, most of the applications we're talking about are definitely multilingual, and a lot of this is, once bandwidth goes up, is video, which really takes care of the literacy issue. You're talking about the two biggest things in India are, are Bollywood and cricket, which need no level of, reading and writing available. Having said that, I think the literacy levels are going up. We heard about that in some of the earlier sessions as well. And I think it's going to be the innovations on applications that will take, use all the technology you just mentioned. Yes, today voice recognition is a reality. Text to voice is a reality, and these are pretty fairly evolved technologies to be used and are being used today. There are operators in India that are using them extremely effectively to sell non-voice, to increase non-voice revenues, which are expected to grow even further.
Yep. And this, adding to that voice recognition point of view, the technology is actually fairly advanced. There's at least 2 or 3 commercially available things that can actually do close to about 126 different languages, right? In recognizing languages, translating things to it, and so as, and a lot of people have been predicting that Moore's law is going to go away right now, but it hasn't, and it's continuing to drive it as the processing capability of these devices continue to improve. The ability to run this real time, right? Today the translation thing has delays and others, but the ability to run this real time to get to where you were talking about, Guruji, is going to be very, very relevant, and it's going to absolutely, come in, and that's very exciting because, for the last 2 to 3 decades, the only way to interact with technology has been through this keyboard and a mouse. Right? The ability to use multiple inputs to be able to go deal with it is only going to increase the adoption and the pervasiveness of the technology that we're talking about.
I think one point, just to add to that, is I think we should look at the fact that the internet penetration in India is about 15%. And if you look, English penetration is at about 11%. I think it's very significant to note, and I think there's a clear relationship between these two. It also shows you that when it comes to mobile connections, telephone, it's reached about 1 billion, and it's some 600 million unique users out there. So they don't need to know English. They speak whatever language they want to. Cable TV penetration has been even far better, in terms of versus internet. So until and unless local language content develops, I do not see internet penetrating across India just through technology, just through wireless, or by laying OFCs. So it's very, very critical that local language content develops. A. B, in terms of voice, it's very encouraging to note that on voice PHP, there's a lot of research being done by IBM in India. And they are coming up with something, or working on something similar to HTTP in terms of hyper voice. It's under testing in Gujarat. I believe some thousands of farmers are already using it. And we have some encouraging things happening in that area. But again, key thing is local language content, and the other thing is development of this voice side of it, because otherwise we are handicapped by English.
There's also, I think there's also a connectivity issue. With these telecom scandals, the operators are effectively not spending money on anything. So not only is the 3G rollout stalled in some given way, an LTE rollout, which I think is very essential for what you're talking about, it arguably hasn't even begun. I think you might know a little bit more about that than me. But we're seeing a huge slowdown. Slowdown isn't even the right word. We're seeing a huge capital-constrained budget where the operators are spending nothing. So not only are these tier 1 cities, there's effectively, even Bombay in general is not all covered by 3G, let alone when you go to these tier 2 cities. So I think from our perspective, that's a huge bottleneck. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, Arun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to make this a telecom discussion, but yeah, the fact is that, yes, there has been some issues over the last few quarters. We are hoping for that to get resolved by the end of the year. I think it's getting ironed out, and it's inevitable for, for the investments to come into consolidation to happen. We're already seeing the signs of that happening. Right from, the mid-90s and early 2000, we have been looking at the data market in India being waiting to happen, and I think it's had all the ingredients of a wide, base of people, a full IT industry available to develop the applications and the products, be it in whatever language the customer needs. And there have been innovations that have been coming in, but not at the same pace as we'd like it to be. I think with the launch of LTE, with the likes of RIL coming in, and really proliferating internet into the country, I think the innovations on product, there's a huge amount of base of development people, entrepreneurs available for them to build that ecosystem which is waiting to happen. I think once the access is available, people will have phones, they won't even know they'll have internet on it. There will be an application which just start working on it. He doesn't know he's doing the internet. And I think that's what's going to lead to people, getting scale out of whatever they're trying to do on applications.
Could you guys comment upon wage inflation and how that is hurting our national effectiveness? And number two, do you think...
wage inflation?
Wage inflation. Okay. Do you think wage inflation in the IT services will force us to innovate in the products, move up the value chain and innovate in the product sector? And as a follow-on question, could you comment on how the competition is evolving? Philippines, China, or Vietnam, are they at a point where they can really challenge our position in the world market for outsourcing specifically?
So, I'll start, and I'm sure everyone's got a different perspective on it. Wage inflation clearly is an issue, but it is also a reality, right? It's going to happen as your economy develops. That's going to happen. I think a bigger challenge for us as consumers of IT services tends to be a lot more of the attrition that happens because of wage inflation, because the amount of attrition that goes on in a market like India is so high that you lose so much continuity during a project, and there's a lot of waste that goes on in that system. So wage inflation as a result, as a contributing factor to attrition, and that is a bigger challenge for us, right? And that's one thing that can actually hurt the Indian marketplace, because there's in some of these other developing economies, even though they don't have the scale, the Philippines and others don't have the scale to compete with India. If I have a more stable workforce, right, they're going to be a lot more attractive as you look at it. So, but again, that was coming from my previous role running the worldwide operations for HP Enterprise Services, saying like we were seeing close to 16, 17, 18% attrition rates, right? Just going across the board, just moving from one company to another, and that always hurts the end clients.
Okay, so I think wage inflation is really a function of aspirations going up, and second is the inflation, the economic inflation. So you're looking at a double-digit food inflation in the past 1 year, and 12% increase in diesel prices. That definitely increases costs. Everything, it's a spillover, it's a domino effect. So that's not really a controllable. I think what would be really helpful, if the efficiency curves, go ahead of the inflation, then you can, match the compensation that you're giving to your employees, which again is not something that we can predict, because that is a function of the kind of work that's coming in and things. One of the steps that I took was to go to rural India, because while we're looking at attrition as one of the biggest problems in urban India, rural India, you still have unemployment as the biggest problem. So the art is really to be able to marry these two things. And Mr. Godrej, in the morning session pointed out the whole point of, they're setting up these, teaching the girls and the women to be beauticians, and more often than not, they're realizing that these people want to become entrepreneurs. So that's a huge growth that you're looking at, one segment of the population. That should affect the people who want to stay longer in the organization. And this is classic. When I was in the US, the typical increases that you would get is single digit. 12% is a huge hike. In India, that's not the case, because the aspirations are growing at a far higher pace. So it's something that is not really controllable. Now, as a result of that, are we losing out to Philippines and China? That's again a double-edged sword. I mean, the kind of businesses that you would not be able to compete with because they're far higher and ahead of us in terms of automation, where India is really lacking out on manufacturing abilities and automation and different parts. But there are definitely businesses that I would see that only would be competitive being done out of India. And especially servicing the Indians out of India is the thing that you need to start looking at building businesses on and like start to find a market locally. I think that should be the real answer for it.
Well, just to add to it, I think your question was also specific to the IT side of it, not necessarily the manufacturing side of it. If you see in the Philippines, the primary growth has been on voice-based BPO. We have actually moved away from that. And unless we are forced by a client to say that besides all this work, you must also take this voice part of it, we do not go out and seek voice-based work. Having said that, we have also opened up a small shop in the Philippines. We want to be there also. However, it's not a threat as yet.
So I've been told we have 5 minutes remaining, so if you want to.
So thank you for talking about product innovation and setting the bar high with Google and Facebook as examples. My question is around an essential ingredient, which is exits and valuations. And I'd love to hear, private equity perspective, an acquirer's perspective, an entrepreneur's perspective on the state of valuations and exits in India. What are the challenges? What are the, where it's at?
Yeah, it's been challenging on both respects. We do see the market changing a little bit. So the landscape is that there were a lot of funds raised in India in that 2007 vintage, and the majority of those funds, depends who you talk to, are hurting for exits right now. That in combination with a lot of this macroeconomic slowdown, Dr. Basu talked last night, GDP growth around 6.4%, we are seeing a lot of, as they call it in India, the promoters, the entrepreneurs, finally starting to indicate that they're better sellers of some assets. So we're seeing valuations start to come in line. The interesting thing is, if you read the Wall Street Journal or different publications, you'll see that India is selling pretty cheap right now. In fact, if you look at PE multiples, it's very cheap. But there's an interesting bifurcation. If you take a deep dive into these companies, and we've generally talked with the CEO of almost every public IT services companies out there, there's a huge bifurcation between companies with good corporate governance and professionally run versus the opposite, where 95% of the company is held in one promoter's hands. You're not quite sure of what the books are. There's 2 sets of books. Those types of companies are very cheap. So we still think as a firm, we're generally cautious, and we think the former is still fairly expensive. In terms of exits, it's been a problem historically. Fortunately, we only started our India effort in January, so we can benefit from that. But any investment we do in India is going to have certain investor rights and put options and things like that. But even those strategies haven't exactly worked. So in summary, it's been challenging, but we are seeing valuations starting to come in line. I don't know if anybody else from the company perspective has any thoughts on that.
It's always been a challenge with services acquisitions, right? It's always been a challenge with services acquisitions because services acquisitions are dependent on the people that you're acquiring, right? To some amount, the IP, but a big part of it is the people that you're acquiring as well as part of the acquisition, or as when you fund it, even when you're considering exits. The challenge has been, it ties back to that previous topic around attrition, right? That you buy something and everyone leaves, like within, your core people leave within the first 6 to 12 months, and the valuation and the value of what you just acquired just goes down. So services, we've, in all of my past roles, you've always struggled and eventually got to the point where mid-2005 decided you were going to not do any services acquisitions or investments in services, because even when companies have come to us and asked for captive setups within this, you're staying away from it because of the challenges to be able to do that. So
I just found it funny that we didn't really plan to sit this way, but they're the suits and the ties, and here are the entrepreneurs. It's a very valid question. In fact, that's one of the things that I thought of really in depth and came to a conclusion that acquisition and valuations, the projections really will be a function of the intellectual property that you have, intellectual capital that you have, and either it's the market base that you develop or the distribution that you're able to set up in India, because that's key, right? Unless you have that, it's not, again, when I say innovation, when I say development, I'm looking at it very, very objectively. I'm not saying this is bad, this is good. I've become an entrepreneur because I took it up as a challenge. So I think it's a great market. But having said that, valuations has to be taken with a pinch of salt. When you're looking at India, and like O'Neill rightly pointed out, it's two sets of books. You really don't know where to tap. So from an investor's perspective, it's great to just look at the intellectual property. So long as the IP rights have been with the company, they've applied for some kind of a copyright. But if it's not, then you're clearly looking at distribution or the customer base. Now, interestingly, for a market like India, that's driven a lot by sentiment. So that's where you need to understand. If you've acquired something, if you're trying to sell the stake, you need to understand what they're quoting or how the company looks is exactly how it is. So the due diligence becomes a lot more stronger, and it has to be a lot more in-depth than it would be in the case of a developed market company. So just my 2 cents.
Let me just give you a little bit of context. So we said it's a $100 billion industry. If I think about it, there's only been one large IT services acquisition. It was a privatization called Hughes Software, who the founding team at Riverwood actually did that deal in 2004 and acquired 6 or 7 companies and sold it as Ericsson to KKR. I don't think there's been any other change of control transaction in India, despite the fact that the whole industry generates $100 billion. So it is a challenging environment, especially with respect to IT services.
Yeah.
Thank you. Going back to 2 points discussed earlier, in terms of IT application, what do you see as the growth area? Do you see a business sector, where you said only 20% is currently using IT? Or do you see health or education? Which sector do you think will lead in terms of future growth? And the second point came up earlier in terms of the university and the industry connection. How many scholarships or research funding or internship your companies are providing, and in general, how is the IT industry connected to the university world in India? Thank you.
I can take that a little bit from my experience in current and past companies. So, I used to work for Motorola, and we kind of had a big industry. Today the semiconductor business is a separate business called Freescale, but we kind of had done VLSI boards and course material to the category B universities all over, and that program still continues and generates a lot of talent, which then can be used by the semiconductor industry. At Ericsson, we do the same thing. We do course material for particularly in the telecom area in a lot of the universities. And surprisingly, you'll see that some of these tie-ups are not only about IITs and BITS Pilani, they're about the next category of universities that are actually giving a mass of people, and most hiring locally is actually happening a lot from there. So I'm pretty sure there are other examples for TCS as well.
All roads lead to Rome. I think if you look at the Indian IT companies, it would be about 1% of the revenue that's invested in R&D. That's the standard, as opposed to 6, 8, 10% with the IT giants in the West. Again, I must say that the academia must embrace research-based engagements, which is lacking currently, even among premier institutes in India. And second, industry would be enticed then to put more innovation in its products and services, sourced locally and through engagements with institutions in India. Going back to my earlier statement, relationship today remains at recruitment and placement level. We have to go beyond that, and that's a fact.
So I'm probably going to try to address the second part of it, the university involvement. You heard the person from Rome answer it. I think the second part of it is around where future growth comes from, right? It wasn't it's really not a surprise that the initial uptake of technology, whether it was in the United States or in India, came from the banking and financial services sector. Because A, they have the money to spend, and B, they really don't make a product. Information is their product. You know, if you're an insurance company or this thing, it's not like Godrej. You don't make a tangible product. You have information as your product, so they're heavily IT intensive. So that's kind of where it started. I start looking at, as these trends, and we didn't get to the trends around mobility and, you know, SCAM, there's an innovative acronym, right? You know, but as you start looking at that, it starts fundamentally changing how business gets done, right? And so it starts moving away from just banking and financial services to other sectors where information becomes the product that you're making, right? And so healthcare clearly is one that can benefit from there, because it's a services industry that's service delivered to people, but you can deliver a far better level of service. Healthcare and education both fit that category as you look at it, and eventually working its way into, because I think in India, when you still have a very a huge supply of labor, so the manufacturing intensive organization is still going to depend on it as long as you have labor. So if I had to talk about where I see the growth, it grows from information intensive economies, information intensive industries, all the way down to the manufacturing in that sequence, right? In the US, you're starting to see a lot more. You know, healthcare is a big deal because of all of the political and everything else that's part of it. So there's a lot of investment going into that space. You know, personally, I do believe the mid-market, you know, in terms of organic growth for it, the mid-market of the US is the engine of the growth here. And it is being ignored by pretty much all the large service providers. Because again, that economies of scale that made them attractive to Fortune 100 companies is a disincentive when it actually goes into mid-sized companies. So if you want to start talking about services innovation, figure out a way to scale down what you're doing to suit this market. You have a wholly untapped market that you can actually come after.
Thank you. Wonderful discussion so far. Personally, I come from semiconductors, and you know that's one area which Indian government puts under the same bucket as IT. You know, when I read about Indian government, all these articles saying, you know, 2020, it's a $400 billion consumption in India. And I see none of the big companies taking any major step. You know, what is the panel's thought process in semiconductors? And thank you. That's
Well, there was an attempt. There was a company called SEM India about 8 years ago, which tried to do a joint venture with AMD. Cost overruns, it ran over budgets, et cetera. From a FDI perspective, we see a lot of semiconductor deals, some chip companies in India, both fabless companies as well as non-fabless companies. It's really tough to compete. We look at what happened with SEM India. A lot of investors lost money on that. And then two, you know, global foundries and things like that is really hard to compete from a cost perspective. I know there's been a lot of stuff in the news about India going, the India government trying to launch a big EMS initiative, I think to the tune of $100 billion by 2020, assuming that includes semiconductors as well. We just think it's tough. You know, we know companies like Global Foundries very well. They sit in our backyard. It doesn't seem that it's going to be possible to compete from a cost perspective. We would love to do hardware. I mean, that's our bread and butter from our Flextronics lineage. We just don't see it in India. It's just tough to compete from our perspective.
So I probably have the privilege of the last question here. So as we are having this discussion, it makes me think of two sort of fundamental engineering constraints that are more relevant for India and populous places like India. On one hand, if you think about universal broadband, the only way to, the natural way to connect everybody would be wireless, because how would you lay wires? But if you then understand the communications theory well, then you realize that if everybody had a wireless connection, there would not be enough bandwidth for anybody to do anything meaningful. So there would be a bandwidth crunch. So then you go and think about maybe we could lay fiber as a backhaul to all the villages as far as we can. And there, if you understand the political economy of laying fiber, you realize that that's going to be prohibitively costly and it's going to take a long time. So ultimately, you end up with the idea that there is this, we're sandwiched between these two fundamental engineering constraints. I don't know what the solution to this is, but it makes me think of two things. Well, one, that there's enough cloud for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. So you kind of have to, even in the cloud, you have to be doing more with less for more type of thinking. But do you agree with this kind of thinking, or do you have any other ways by which India would alleviate these impact of these two fundamental constraints?
I just want to add one point here before you address the real question. Factually, I just want to tell you that as part of the statewide area network program that was launched in 2004-05 by the government of India, OFC has been laid up to each and every block in the country. Okay, that's a phenomenal achievement. And from the block to the village level, it's the last mile connectivity on wireless, which I think is pretty much complete. So as far as laying that as the first stage to connect the entire country, that's already achieved. The second part of it is building the data centers and the DRCs. That is also complete. Now the third phase is going on, which is putting all those applications to run on that, whether it's municipal or MCA 21 for corporate affairs and et cetera, e-passport, and all those things are being rolled out today. So in terms of that bandwidth, OFC, India is very well connected today.
So if I would take your question, basically, I think I clearly agree with you that wireline is a premium service. Be it on OFC, be it on DSL, be it on whatever technology you might. Okay, and that premium service is today fairly sparse, and it's not penetrated enough. Having said that, all the stuff that he just mentioned is also yet to start to get utilized because of lack of universal access. So, moment you have higher level of wireless penetration of internet and ubiquitous use on wireless devices, which leads to the choke you talked about, this premium service will be available for those that actually need it. I mean, today you have to have people starting to begin to use some of the IT services for that choke to happen. Today, 3G services are underutilized, even in spite of being just 5 megahertz, because there is nothing for them to use. People are not watching movies on it. Okay, you need to have applications, and a lot of the government applications and the e-governance, e-health, and all of that stuff does not proliferate till there is not enough penetration all over the world, all over the country. Okay, so I think it's going to be a sequence of wireless penetration followed by a lot of that optical fiber which is on the ground, a lot of the universal fund, USO fund that's available to the government for them to be able to put in there the moment they see that these chokes are happening. I think that will be a very, very good problem for us to have.
Again, both very valid points. I'm probably going to give you a different perspective, right? So for technology to be useful, it has to improve the basic human condition, right? And, all of the discussion that we're talking about, purely comes from a technology standpoint that's saying, yeah, if I can get the bandwidth better, I can push all this content to you and others, where actually the constraint is in the other direction. In my previous role, I happened to work with one of Mr. Gorders' competitors in India in terms of how products get distributed to villages and things like that. And you're walking into it with, okay, how do I get smartphones to work with these guys who are delivering these 4 and 5 packages to the shop in this place? When you had to kind of, halfway through that thing, you had to stop and say, yeah, that's not the solution. It's the other way around, right? Now, how do you actually start leveraging it? So a big component around, so you can operate it from theory of constraints, is the way you're looking at it. You could also look at it from I'm pretty sure you're familiar with design thinking, right? And how do you actually start building things that are designed to suit purpose, right? And suit the need that you've got. And I think there's an opportunity there because, whether it's India or China or any of those things, India is not one conglomeration of 1.3 billion people who all look the same and act the same, right? Different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds and others. So, you know, in order to be able to scale and succeed in India, I do believe you have to figure out how to get to mass customization, right? Go from the standardization and industrialization mindset that we've got to something that's more like mass customization, where, you know, if you look at automotive industry today, you know, 100 years ago they made one brand of car in one color. Today they can roll out, you know, 6 different brands with, you know, 100 different options off the same line, because they figured out what needs to be common, but what needs to get, you know, designed for fit. So I think taking that approach in, the outside in, the client in view of it, will actually give you a better solution, because now you're not talking about what constraints am I operating under. It's kind of what's the need and what can I design to be able to go do that. I think somebody mentioned the fact that, you know, Apple, however successful they are, they still have to figure out how you can sell something when my base design, you know, so the cost for putting together a 32 gig iPhone is $199. Yeah, yes, the Indian market is big, but you're not going to get universal penetration with that type of the base rate, you know. And so you have to start thinking about it differently to solve some of these problems.
We're spending a lot of time on connectivity. The OFC may be laid out, but working on financing initiatives that involve connectivity as a combination of fiber and Wi-Fi. So we can talk after if you're interested. But I want to segue to concluding remarks. 2 points. One is I think my folks here on this side were set up. We actually didn't wear ties last night, but we were instructed to wear ties today. So I don't know who instructed us to wear ties. So I thought we were set up for one comment, so I wanted to set the record straight there. And 2, I want to. Oh, was that it? Okay.
Check it off.
As concluding remarks, I'd like for everybody to make 2 remarks. I want to, each panelist one by one. Number 1 is, are we going to get there? Yes or no answer to 225 billion. Number 2 is, what is the major risk that would prevent us from getting there? Srini, can we start with you?
Yeah, I'm highly optimistic that India will get there. You know, nobody predicted India would get to this. I absolutely believe we will get to the 225. You know, and you heard a lot about the innovation and others that's coming in. I think it is going to come down to, until you have a crisis, you're not going to figure out like what the next step is. But the fact that you're inherently capable of innovating, right? And I was in the arts panel before this, and one of the panelists there said, like, Indians are born with the DNA to have both right brain and left brain thinking. And he cited your poetry from the morning today, and that is pretty unique, right? You know, I think his quote was, "We're born singing and die dancing," or something like that. You know, and so that is very, very unique in India. And that's something that you can use to be able to succeed going forward. So I'm very optimistic in how that gets in. Clearly, I think you know, the traps of becoming a more industrialized economy, right? You know, where you come out of school and the first thing you want people to do is to go find a job, whether it's a call center job or a BPO job or something like that, can get in your way. So it's, you know, it's the biggest thing that can stop you is your own success. Right, and to the extent that we can recognize that, and it's been, for me personally, it's been a great thing coming into this conference just to see the diversity of thought in the Indian landscape. So I'm very, very optimistic about it, and I look forward to watching the next 10 years.
Clearly, I'm very optimistic. That's what I relocated back for. So I'm there to tap the opportunity. I know for a fact it will be done. Maybe we'll actually overshoot the target as well. The biggest risk in my mind is really the unpredictability of the scams and the government and, you know, some of that. But having said that, I'm a big fan of, you know, all the case studies. I'm sure, you know, lots of people, MBA students have done that as well. Rupert Murdoch, at the time that they were expanding in UK, right? BSB, the way expanded it, you know, they sort of put the dish outside the premise of where the government had allowed them. I mean, very innovative, and that's exactly what I think will need to come out of sets of people such as these. And, you know, there's enough people who are willing to kind of take that risk, take the jump, take the leap of faith, and bring about the innovation. But having said that, I think the opportunity is immense. The potential is huge. It's just a matter of us sort of taking that first step.
What is you?
Yeah, so I think, when we were an IT industry less than $1 billion, we're trying to go to 8 billion. It was a 10x number. The industry did it. I think from 8 to 80 was a famous NASSCOM McKinsey report that we all read and had skeptical thoughts on. Was a 10x growth again, and the industry did it. I think today we are at 100 billion. 225 is just a little over 2x, and it's absolutely doable. The market is there. The industry has the capability. I think from the biggest challenges could be infrastructure in India itself, including telecom, as well as the innovation piece that we've talked about, and both of which I think the industry is on track. And for particularly on the infrastructure side, there would be some government help that would be needed, but we are seeing some of that ironing out, and I think the next year or two is going to be critical for us to make sure that we have that available for us to be reaching that. But I think absolutely optimistic to get there.
I am definitely very optimistic that that number will be achieved and more. In areas of being cautious, I would say that we need to increase investment in education significantly. What we see today, or even this entire IT boom or etc., it was driven by people who came out of those institutes which were created by Nehru in the 50s and 60s, the IITs and the IIMs and etc. And may I say, with the demise of Nehru in 64, that movement stopped. And even though we have gone from 4 IITs in the last couple of years to 16 IITs, may I say, an institute just does not become an IIT by renaming it. It'll really take a lot of time for these additional IITs to reach the level of the 4 IITs. I'm very optimistic also because the present government has earmarked 2% of GDP on scientific research, and I think the 2% number is very significant. That separates countries which are industrialized from the developing ones. Japan is at a little more than 3%, the US is at about 2.6%, so with India focusing on that, results are not going to happen overnight. Results are going to take time. But we must not lose that focus, and we must continue to invest in education. I think that would ensure that India's flag continues to fly high in every sector in the coming decade or so.
I think we get there largely fueled by M&A, actually, as India Inc. purchases attractive assets in the Americas and Europe. The biggest risk, I think, is government, down from the telecom infrastructure to tax regulations and everything else. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to grab a hold of one of us outside.
I think before we all leave for lunch, it's been a pleasure listening to all these leading thinkers of IT industry. And we thank you from our bottom of the heart that you took time from your busy schedule. And we have something as a token of appreciation for all you guys. Thanks a lot.